A 24-year-old Michigan mom is dead tonight, and we know the suspect's violent past started decades ago here in West Michigan.
Tonight, Target 8 has the courageous story of John White's first known victim.
All I could see was red all over the place. There wasn't a place on my body that wasn't covered.
That 49-year-old Calhoun County woman knew John White 32 years ago. Tonight, he sits in the Isabella County Jail in Mount Pleasant, charged with killing his neighbor, 24-year-old Rebecca Gay. White was planning to marry Gay's mom and often babysat her 3-year-old son. When police started interviewing him yesterday, he admitted that he fantasized about killing Gay for days, then made his fantasy a reality, dumping her body in a ditch.
Our team of investigators has spent the last 24 hours working to learn as much as possible about this man accused of monstrous things, where he lived and who he hurt. We begin with Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker, who spoke with Teresa Morris, White's first known victim. She is a survivor, and her interview is honest and graphic. We want to warn you, you may find it hard to hear. And Ken, White only spent 2 years behind bars for that attack.
Yeah, Brian, that's right. Teresa is John White's first known victim, attacked more than 30 years ago. But she is convinced there were others before her and likely more since then that nobody knows about.
He said, "This isn't my first time, but just shut up. You're making this more difficult than it has to be."
Words spoken, she says, by John White as he stabbed her 15 times. This was in 1980. She was 17. He was a 22-year-old married man living just down the street in a Battle Creek home that has since been torn down. It's now a parking lot. He had invited her over to look at his new slot car racetrack. Within moments, she says, she felt the first stab under her right shoulder blade. Then she recalls facing him as he cut open her abdomen.
I remember watching him, and it was just, God, the look on his face was just like pure pleasure. Like putting a knife into butter.
Then she was on the floor.
He held me while he did it, and just kept rocking me, and shh, just go to sleep.
She says she fought. A few times, she says, he called her by his wife's name.
He would stand there and he would look at me on the floor and he says, "Well, are you dead yet?"
Teresa says she is not surprised to learn that White wanted to have sex with Rebecca Gay after killing her. She believes that that was his plan for her more than 30 years ago.
He said, "You're going to be a really nice piece of meat." What are you talking about? And he says, "Well, if I can't have you, I'm sure as hell not going to let anybody else have you."
She said that he kissed her and touched her as she lay on the floor.
He wiped my mouth off and he kissed me and he held my hand and he said, "You're going to go now." He says, "I'm real sorry you had to go like this." He says, "But what the f***, you're just a woman."
She says she played dead and that he left her believing he had cut her throat. Instead, he got her chin. Then, she says, his wife walked in with a sheet.
He put a sheet over my face and said, "Shut up. Just shut up." And I'm just begging her for help.
A woman visiting the home heard her screams and helped her. Soon there were police and paramedics. White got 5 to 10 years in prison, but was released after 2.
I felt really betrayed and I was scared. Not just for me, because of the way that he did it was so easy and so comfortable for him. I was scared that maybe he'd either try to come back and finish or somebody else would take my place.
What a terrifying story. I mean, it's horrible. Now, she had another account that happened with John White, right?
Yeah, it was about 4 years after he was released, and she had no idea he was out of prison. She was standing at a Secretary of State's office. She was standing in line, and she heard this voice behind her, and it's this voice that had been haunting her ever since. And she turned around, and there he was, smiling at her in line. She said she grabbed one of those stanchions and actually went after him, and a security guard had to separate them, and the security guard just told her to run.
And he only served 2 years in prison?
Yeah, he got 5 to 10, but was released after 2 years.
That is amazing. Ken Kolker, thank you for that.
Ken, thank you. Let's shift now to this week's brutal killing of Rebecca Gay near Mount Pleasant. 24-hour News 8 Steve Kelso talked with her longtime boyfriend's family, and Steve is live in Midland tonight. Steve?
That's right, Sue. I'm outside of Bullet Creek High School here, where later tonight a candlelight vigil will be held for Rebecca Gay, a 2007 graduate of the high school. To give you an idea of the shockwaves this has sent through the community, by 9 o'clock this morning, the school had already confirmed that over 200 people would be confirmed to attend that vigil tonight. But perhaps nowhere was that shock felt greater than down the road a little ways in Freeland, where I spent the day talking to Lisa Quinn, the mother of Rebecca Gay's longtime boyfriend.
That we're in shock and unbelief that any human being could ever do anything so evil to anyone else, especially someone who was loving and kind and good like Rebecca was.
For the last 2 years, Lisa Quinn's son Aaron has been dating Rebecca Gay. The young couple was making big plans for their future, plans Rebecca Gay will never know about.
This is an engagement ring that my son bought for Rebecca, and he planned on giving it to her. My son is devastated. My son, every time the news comes on, he has to get up and he has to walk away. He's not only lost the love of his life, he's lost a little boy.
Aaron had also become very close with Rebecca's 3-year-old son. It's his future that weighs heavy on Lisa Quinn's mind.
His mother, his beautiful mother, who loved him so much. Never get to be with his mama. He sleeps with his mother. How is he to understand? How do you tell a little boy, someone you trusted, took his mother's life?
She said she did this interview with me today because she wants people to know about Rebecca Gay, her kindness, her dedication to her son, and how perfect Aaron and Rebecca were together. But mostly tonight, she wants answers.
Why would anyone want to hurt somebody like that? Why? I don't know. I don't have many answers.
And it's difficult to come up with any kind of answers for this situation. It's spread so far across this community, and poor Lisa, she just wants those answers so desperately. Coming up tonight at 11, 24-hour News 8's Ryan Takeo will be here for that candlelight vigil. Right now, I'm live in Midland. Steve Kelso, 24-hour News 8.
Thank you, Steve. We want to now fill you in on the 30-year gap between 1980 and now. Rebecca Gay of Mount Pleasant was John Douglas White's third alleged known victim, the second to die.
Target 8 investigator Henry Erb has been tracking White's movements around West Michigan. Henry?
We wanted to make sure you know exactly where John Douglas White has been.
Tonight at 6, a Target 8 investigation.
We are talking to those who lived next to a man now charged with murder. He had killed before, but they never knew. Tonight, they're pushing for changes.
Despite being caught up in the Roy Schmidt scandal, Jase Bolger kept his job, and tonight we know he's still in charge of the House.
Do you have anything to say?
Not backing down, our crew's trying to talk with a newly re-elected Kent County Commissioner who may face charges for allegedly sexually assaulting a girl starting when she was just 12 years old.
Plus, for the first time, the entire video that shows what happened in the moments before a child was thrown against a bus window.
Live, this is 24-hour News 8.
He slipped through the system, which he never should have. If he hadn't have slipped through, the family, my family, no one would be going through this tragedy.
That family lived next door to this convicted killer, and they didn't even know it. In fact, they called John White a close friend. Now, because of our Target 8 reports, they're pushing for a new law they say will help prevent tragedies like this one that happened to Rebecca Gay, allegedly beaten and strangled by John White on Halloween. Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker has the story that could end up having a big impact on our state.
Before the death of Rebecca Gay, whose body was found here about 10 miles west of Mount Pleasant, neighbors said they knew little about the suspect's criminal background. Now they hope this will lead to a registry of violent offenders.
When we first met him, he kind of gave us kind of a creepy, eerie kind of vibe.
But they found nothing sinister about their neighbor when they typed John White's name into Google.
The more you knew him, the more he kind of grew on you.
At some point, though, they learned about his conviction for involuntary manslaughter.
He told us that he had sold drugs to a young woman and she had overdosed and he left her there.
What he didn't say was that his victim's body was so decomposed they couldn't tell how she died. He spent 12 years in prison.
And he's like, you wouldn't have wanted to know me back then. I was Charles Manson. That was in our kitchen, he told us that.
But he told them he found God and had changed. They knew nothing of his 1981 conviction for stabbing a teenage girl 15 times in his basement in Battle Creek. That victim survived, and he spent 2 years in prison.
And if you had known about the thing from 1981,
he would not been around my family. I would have made sure that he was not even in this park, living right beside us. I would have done everything.
Instead, he grew close to the couple and their 6 children. They went to the church where he was pastor. Still, they were leery of his behavior, heavy drinking and cussing that seemed to get worse in recent weeks. And his recent obsession with Rebecca Gay, his girlfriend's 24-year-old daughter.
He just would talk about her a lot. I mean, there was some obsessions of she was a beautiful girl and that kind of thing.
They say a Target 8 report on the teenager he stabbed in Battle Creek led them to start an online petition for a violent offender registry, similar to the sex offender list. Several other states have such a list, including Indiana.
So people can be aware of the people that are around him, to maybe realize that the people that you trust are maybe not the people you should be trusting.
If this change is made, they want it to be called Rebecca's Law. Near Mount Pleasant in Isabella County, Ken Kolker, 24 Hour News 8.
Living with a killer. The son of John White tells Target 8 about disturbing books, erratic behavior, and split personalities.
Yes, John was the good guy and Jimmy was the bad guy.
And a dramatic crash with a kid behind the wheel. Plus, we're going to enjoy a huge weekend warm-up.
Thanks for joining us tonight. The 6 o'clock starts right now.
Live, this is 24 Hour News 8.
He knew that he was mentally sick, but he refused to engage it and tell people about it and accept help for it.
He calls his father a psychopath. Tonight, we have the most telling insight yet into the mind and behavior of John White, a man with a history of twisted violence in West Michigan, accused of killing again in Mount Pleasant.
Today, Target 8 talked with his son and learned even more about just how troubled he really is.
Here's Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker.
And so who killed Rebecca then?
I don't know.
I mean, Jimmy or John?
I don't know. I think he had a mental snap.
John White was the father he knew, the pastor of a small Mount Pleasant church who was known to help his neighbors. Jimmy, he said, was his father's other personality, who was often aggressive. John was the good guy?
Yes, John was the good guy and Jimmy was the bad guy.
His 55-year-old father is accused of killing his fiance's daughter, Rebecca Gay, on Halloween Day. 17-year-old Gabriel White, the youngest of 3 kids, says he learned about his father through stories told to him by his mother. His parents were already married in 1980 when John White stabbed a 17-year-old girl 15 times in their basement. This was long before Gabriel was born. White served 2 years in prison. The victim in that attack recently told Target 8 that White's wife put a sheet over her head as she cried for help. But the mom told her son differently.
She put it over her body to keep her warm, to keep her from dying, to keep the warmth in her body. If it wasn't for my mom, that woman would be dead. My mom saved her life.
14 years later, in 1995, White was convicted of involuntary manslaughter for the death of a woman in Kalamazoo County. Gabriel was born 4 days after his father's arrest. His parents divorced in 1996. Gabriel said he visited his dad in prison. His dad was then set free in 2007 after serving his maximum sentence.
You can't really get to know somebody in a prison cell.
He says he lived with his dad off and on in recent years at his trailer near Mount Pleasant and got to know his fiancée and her daughter, Rebecca. He said he wouldn't be surprised if his dad is a serial killer.
He was a truck driver. What a truck driver does is ship things, but then they have their side life, which nobody really knows what that is.
The Isabella County Sheriff says questions about a split personality would be addressed by a psychological exam ordered yesterday for White. I'm Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker.
He stabbed a teen repeatedly until he thought she was dead. 14 years later, he killed a woman and dumped her body in the woods.
So how is it that John Douglas White was free to fulfill a sick fantasy and kill yet again?
Target 8 investigator Ken Kolker has worked this story since the shocking murder of Rebecca Gay in Mount Pleasant, a killing that left a little boy without his mom.
Tonight, for the first time, Ken, you have answers about what happened here.
Yeah, Brian and Sue, what we discovered was a courtroom mistake, plea deals, old laws that failed to protect victims, and technology that wasn't advanced enough to keep John White behind bars.
I really hurt for that little boy. I really hurt for her family. They trusted him, so I know exactly what they're going through.
Teresa Morris was John White's first known victim 32 years ago, and she also trusted him until he stabbed her 15 times. She was just 17. For that, he spent 2 years in prison.
I'm really upset with the system.
And so are the relatives of White's second known victim, who had predicted that he would kill again.
Oh God, it tore my heart out because I knew that girl wouldn't have to die if they would just kept him in prison.
So how does a man serve just 14 years in prison for killing one woman and nearly killing another? Target 8 found those answers in old police and court records and in interviews with more than a dozen people. In 1980, John White was 22, married and living in Battle Creek when he invited his 17-year-old neighbor to his basement to look at his racetrack. The first jab was under her right shoulder blade, and he kept stabbing and smiling.
He wiped my mouth off and he kissed me and he held my hand and he said, "You're gonna go now." He says, "I'm real sorry you had to go like this." He says, "But what the f***, you're just a woman."
A jury convicted White of attempted murder and he got 5 to 10 years in prison.
They sent him away and they left me alone.
But he wasn't gone for long. What Teresa didn't know is that White appealed and won, claiming that his attorney made a mistake by not raising an insanity defense. White had claimed amnesia. But instead of a new trial, White got a deal. 2 years probation, no more jail time, as long as he got mental health treatment. The defense attorney whose mistake led to that appeal died recently. So did the judge. The prosecutor who approved the plea deal, Conrad Sint, is now a Calhoun County judge. He declined to go on camera, but he told Target 8 that he has just a vague memory of the 32-year-old case. He says it's possible they agreed to a plea deal out of fear that White might actually win an insanity defense. He said White likely would get more prison time if this had happened under today's sentencing guidelines. Judges had no guidelines back then.
They promised me he wasn't going to ever hurt anyone again.
9 years after White's probation was up, 26-year-old Vicky Sue Wall disappeared near Kalamazoo.
She's a good girl. She's a normal girl. Went to school, graduated, got a job.
White was still married with 2 kids and 1 on the way. He had met Vicky at work, and they were having an affair. Surveillance video showed Vicky getting into a black pickup with a bearded man in a Meijer parking lot at 3 in the morning. Deputy Eric Dunathan first questioned White, and White was evasive.
I knew that he had killed her.
White later told police he may have hurt Vicky during one of his blackouts. His wife told police about his multiple personalities, and police found possible traces of blood in his pickup.
He'd done a pretty good job of cleaning it.
But it's not clear what became of that. DNA testing was in its infancy. A state police DNA expert told Target 8 they needed a lot more blood for tests back then. Now they need just a speck. A source close to that 1994 investigation says a positive hit could have locked up a murder conviction. Relatives in the meantime kept searching for Vicky's body. 2 miles from that Meijer parking lot, a neighbor stumbled across the remains of Vicky Sue Wall across the street from this nature trail. But that was 6 weeks after she disappeared, and her body was so badly decomposed that police could never figure out how she died.
I noticed 2 drag marks.
He followed the marks down the 2-track.
And as I got further, I seen a white tennis shoe.
A trail of bent-over weeds led to a pair of women's underwear.
Right then when the odor hit me and I noticed the skull was showing, that's when I turned around and hightailed it out of here.
Prosecutors charged White with open murder. In a jail letter written to his wife and obtained by Target 8, even White was preparing for life in prison. But he refused to talk or take a lie detector test. Without evidence, White pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter.
They felt they were lucky to get that because it took so long to find the body. She was so decomposed that they couldn't even figure out a cause of death.
White got the most time he could get, 8 to 15 years in prison. But he called it a tragic accident. And he said, quote unquote, "I love Vicky very much."
You'd like to see him go away for life, but you know, you get what you can get.
Sources tell Target 8 that White later told a prison psychologist about his fantasies: to kill the prosecutor, Kerry Klein, and his defense attorney, Kathleen Brickley, and have sex with their bodies. The prison warned both women. Both declined to comment. In 2007, after serving nearly 13 years for Vicky Sue Wall's death, White was a free man.
He knew that he was mentally sick, but he refused to engage it and tell people about it and accept help for it.
He moved to Mount Pleasant, became pastor of a small church, got engaged.
He was completely crazy until the end.
On Halloween Day, he killed his fiance's daughter, 24-year-old Rebecca Gay, then dumped her body in a ditch. He told police it was part of a sexual fantasy involving dead women. The death has left a retired deputy shaking his head.
Were you shocked or surprised?
No. I knew he would do it again. It was inevitable.
Really disturbing. You know, there's been a lot of changes in the court system, of course. Do you think something like this could happen today anymore?
You know, in talking to the experts, it sounds unlikely. I mean, first off, you have sentencing guidelines. Back in 1980, there were no guidelines. And, you know, nowadays, stabbing a woman 15 times, leaving her for dead, you would not just serve 2 years in prison. Then there was a Victims' Rights Act, which is also new. And that victim from 1980 would have been, you know, kept, you know, appraised of everything all down the line. And then, of course, there's DNA. With the incredible advances in DNA. In fact, they're putting his DNA into the FBI database, national database, to see if they can link him to other unsolved homicides.
Chilling.
Yes.
Ken Kolker, thank you for that.